Hi, and welcome back to the Behaviour Sleuths. I'm Sala.
I'm Monica.
And today we're here, episode 2. So it's all still pretty new. But today we wanted to talk a little bit more about change, to actually start exploring some of the aspects that I think are helpful for people to understand around change. And we thought we would kick off by me just talking about some of the change that I see people struggling to deal with every day at work and on my emails. And that often, when Monica was explaining last week that in terms of the disruption that can come with change, that marital status change scores extremely highly. And often people anecdotally will say to me, oh yes, it's this and moving country are the two most stressful things, divorce and moving country. And I think it's definitely true that I see people who either struggle because they didn't want to get divorced, and this is a change they didn't seek, even though they may have been very unhappy in the relationship, or it's somebody who does want to get divorced. So this is the change they think they want, but its consequences they haven't anticipated. They didn't maybe think the process would be so hard. They didn't really think about what it might mean from a financial aspect or in relation to their children. And I think that can be a challenge as well. So often I'm seeing people struggle with just the small changes that happen when you separate. So not even getting onto the macro changes, but just the tiny ones, like how will we sort out who's going to buy school uniforms? How will we sort out summer camp? How do we sort out who's going to pick them up on Saturday? Who's going to pay the utility bills? How do we organize paying for the mortgage for this property? What do we do about the property? All of these questions, but then also the really fundamental ones to people. Who am I now? If I'm not married, if I'm not in this relationship, if I'm a single parent, what does that look like? Who am I? And so I think mostly I see a lot of quite negative reactions to the changes that people are experiencing, understandably. But I was just telling Monica about one particular case where it was very prolonged and there was a very high level of animosity, at least on one side. And the other person who was struggling to cope with the change and struggling to run their own business actually had some significant health issues over the course of, it depends. Sometimes I work with people for a couple of months. These guys I worked with for over 18 months. And over the 18 months, I saw him struggle with some really serious health issues, which seemed strange that he'd been in good health sort of a year ago and now everything seemed broken. And talking about that with Monica, I think, she alluded to last time, there are some reasons why that happens. And we thought it might be helpful to just talk about what was maybe going on for him from a psychology perspective for his brain. So Monica, I don't know if you want to sort of talk about that.
Sure. So, our nervous system has two parts, the gas and the brakes. But when we're always on gas, like stress of divorce, now who am I? What's going to happen with the money? The gas is always up. And it's very hard to put on the brakes, which means the cortisol hormone, the stress hormone, is just pumping with adrenaline, which kind of puts us in the fight or flight state. So if you're always up here and you're having a hard time putting on the brakes, then your body starts to break down. Because if you imagine a car driving, it's going to break down. We have to rest. We have to decompress.
Yeah. And I guess it's hard because sometimes when I see people, it feels, I think for them, like they're energized. That actually
the anxiety.
Yes. They're kind of energized. They have to move. There has to be action. Things have to happen right now. They're really agitated and kind of highly aroused, which then also means that every time something happens in the mediation, if something, they're asked for a document that they think they've already given, or they're asked a question that they interpret as an attack, it's like, boom, there's no ameliorating factor. Yeah.
And I think that is because, let's say, whatever happened in this marriage, maybe there was some abuse or some trauma or triggers, right? And maybe those triggers aren't even from the marriage. Maybe they're from childhood or work. And so our stress threshold gets more thinner and thinner and thinner, and then boom, sometimes we snap. Yeah. And there's nothing more stressful than, I'm sure, sitting in a mediation with your ex or soon to be ex, negotiating these high emotional situations. So you can imagine adrenaline is just pumping, 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 pumping.
Yeah.
And then you're seeing your
Yes,
trigger
yeah,
right
very
across from
triggering.
you. Where's the
Yeah.
brake?
So if adrenaline is kind of the gas, what's the brake? What can we do to, I mean, we're going to talk more about in future episodes about what the brake is, but what's the balance to that?
So the brake is, how do we come out of that fight or flight? And naturally we do it because, like I said, we can't hold this for too long. Our body naturally crashes. So, but we're not crashing because of prolonged stress. Eventually our body just crashes for us. It's like some people push, 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 push till exhaustion, push, push, push until they're sick. But we can put the brakes on ourselves, right? Through breathing, yoga, meditation, even the way we talk to ourselves. Like, how are we interpreting this situation?
Yeah. But I guess that's interesting that it's sort of this idea of we can do some things that are deliberate and conscious, but a lot of what we experience is happening below our consciousness. It's below our level. We don't realize we're reacting and we've reacted. It's too late.
It's too late.
Yeah.
So I guess we could
explain how that works, how we react before we've even realized.
So there's the amygdala part of our brain, right? Fear and anger. And once that's on, it's very hard for us to use our frontal lobe because now we're in fight or flight. And when you're in fight or flight, the gas part of your body is saying, do whatever you can to survive. But you don't have time to think. And so people come down when the brakes come on. They're like, why did I do that? Oh, I'm so embarrassed. They blame themselves, but they don't realize it's actually their bodies trying to survive for them. Their body took over.
Yeah. But it's interesting how you'd think that, oh, but all of these parts of my brain that, you know, can do problem solving, can do rational thought, can analyze things, that would be helpful. But actually, it's too late. It's shut down.
Yeah,
the other part is saying, this is an emergency.
Yeah.
are.
So imagine you're trying to do math or something. You're like, your brain is analytical, it's working fine. And I come up to you and I'm like, solid. And I'm like in your face.
Yes.
And all of a sudden you're like, whoa, I'm scared. You can't do your math anymore, right? Yeah.
Well, it's funny when I'm talking to clients, I sometimes, and they're getting agitated, I sometimes try and get them to do things like write things down, do some maths as a way of starting to try and restart this
That's
part
a good
of the
idea.
brain. But yes, I think, and I guess the challenge is those neurotransmitters, cortisol, adrenaline, they all serve a purpose. They do help to keep you alive. If you're in a really dangerous situation, they will give you the strength, but they're not, but chronic stress, chronic adrenaline is destructive.
Very much so. I mean, this is what turns on those sleeping genes like cancer or, you know, schizophrenia. Not saying people with under chronic stress are going to get those things, but if you have that gene, and it will lie dormant if you don't have all the stress.
So it's kind of, I guess, understanding the impact of what's happening around us, how it can impact us on a sort of even a cellular level, to look at that. Well, I guess also interesting, and maybe that's another series, is looking at genetic memory, how within our DNA we store memories of past traumas. And anyway, it's a whole nother topic. So if negative reactions to stress and change can also impact us on a health perspective, I guess one thing that you mentioned that can help us to adjust to this is psychological flexibility. What does that mean?
Yeah, so psychological flexibility is the ability to kind of adapt or say, okay, I can regulate my own emotions. I accept this is happening. Doesn't mean I have to like it, but I accept I can't change it. I'm going to focus and be present as much as I can. Learning to kind of tell yourself, okay, I don't know what's going to happen. There's this gray area, but I can handle it. I can tolerate it. Right? Instead of catastrophizing, waiting for that other shoe to drop and it getting even bigger. Saying things like, I feel stressed versus I am stressed, not over identifying with your feelings, your mood. And sometimes it's nice to take in the wins. So what have I let's say I'm feeling bad. I just lost my job. Okay, well, I need to think what my wins are career-wise to keep me going, to keep me motivated so that that rejection doesn't totally cripple me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that's an interesting idea, that idea of accepting it because we can't control it. And it sounds hopeless, but actually it's kind of empowering because so Fred Luskin, who is a doctor at Stanford, worked on the Forgiveness Project. He talks about unenforceable rules, that we have an unenforceable rule, it's breached, and now we create a grievance, which then leads us to create physiological stress for ourselves.
Yes.
But one of the things he talks about is not that we want bad things to happen to ourselves, or that or we accept that bad things should happen to us. But I mean, one of the examples he gives that I always think is interesting is around divorce. And he'll say things like, instead of saying my partner shouldn't cheat on me, or my partner should be faithful to me, we need, which is an unenforceable rule. You can't control another person's fidelity. Instead, we should say, I want a partner who is faithful. I want a partner who doesn't cheat on me, which is something that we can say, which is a positive statement about what we want, but can lead us to accept that a situation's happened that is outside our control.
Yeah. And so in that way, it sounds more active rather than passive, right?
Yeah.
This didn't happen to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and also it's not because that's the other thing I sometimes see is that kind of change happens. People then blame themselves because they're looking for who was responsible for this. And sometimes, often, mostly, it is the other person that they blame, but also sometimes they blame themselves. They're like, well, I should have seen the signs. I should have noticed.
So blame can be comforting. If I can blame you, if I can blame myself, I can maybe predict the future and stop it from happening. So I blame myself. That means I'll never make this mistake again. I blame you. Now I'm going to watch you build a wall, right? Protect myself from you.
Yeah. But I think that idea of acceptance as agency, acceptance as accepting that you have control over yourself, I think that's a really interesting idea. I also like the idea you were just talking about, and maybe you could just expand on it a little bit, about I feel stressed versus I am stressed. Kind of the transience of feelings.
Sure. So you see this a lot with depression. I am depressed. And that sounds like, how are you going to get out of that one? Versus
because it's your identity.
Depressed. It's your identity.
Yeah.
Versus I feel depressed, which it means feelings come and go, right? Yeah. So moods, feelings change, stress.
Yeah.
If we can realize, okay, it's not forever. I can tolerate this until I get through it, right? But that being said, when change just comes, especially when unpredictable, like loss. Yeah. So, for example, COVID. How many losses came through that? That was unexpected. And if it keeps piling on, I lost my job. I lost my loved one. I lost my identity. I lost my kids. Like in divorce, this can happen too. Then the stress threshold just breaks, and you can try to be as flexible as you can. You can try and find the opportunity. But if you feel like you're just surviving, like, how am I going to eat? How am I going to pay rent? How am I going to pay for my kids? You're just always up here with the gas, literally, because you have to survive on a daily basis. And so for them, it's like, we can think positive. It's not really fair.
Yeah. So psychological flexibility is also about how we increase our capacity to deal with change. Yeah. Because what you were just talking about is the overload. So I can tolerate this level of change.
Yes.
I'm okay here, but now we've gone over, and now I'm in overwhelm. So it's kind of, how can we, which we're going to talk about in future episodes, how can we increase our own capacity to tolerate change, to deal with change?
Yes. And how do we prevent and cope with the overwhelm? Yeah, we can talk about that next episode.
Yeah,
for sure.
Absolutely. Okay. So looking forward to episode 3.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for joining us, and good to see you.
Nice to see you. Bye.
Bye-bye.